Mike Sullivan fired, kind of, by the Pittsburgh Penguins. A mutual parting of ways, I think is how they put it. And if Bill Belichick can't admit that he was fired last year, then neither will Mike Sullivan, baby. But he's got all kinds of options. 2-time Stanley Cup winner. There are now 7 teams looking for coaches. 6 for Mike Sullivan, because one of them's the Penguins. And one of those teams, I guess, technically, is the Boston Bruins. They have not fired Joe Sacco, but he's an interim. And I think they expect him to kind of move out of his office before Don Sweeney has to go in there and tell him. I think that's what we're dealing with at this point. But they're going to be looking for a coach. And Don Sweeney said in that disastrous press conference last week that they're looking for a guy with obviously NHL experience. And they're not going for David Carl. I'm okay with that. I wouldn't mind that kind of bold move, and I like David Carl, but I'm okay with the Bruins saying, you know what, we want an NHL coach. Fine. They're also looking for someone with an evolving offensive mind, whatever the fuck they called it, right? Someone who does value some offense and is not trying to make first-round picks become Charlie Coyle. Nothing against Charlie Coyle, but let's just have these kids with offensive skill show off their offensive skill. I love that. But still has a strong defensive mind. I think Mike Sullivan has a bit of that. He is still more of an old school coach, and I don't know how much offensive creativity he has when he's not coaching, Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin and Jake Gensel and Chris Letang and those guys when they were at their peak and winning Stanley Cups. Phil Kessel, of course, Bruins great. But obviously Mike Sullivan has a ton of ties to the area. Marshfield kid, BU, Bruins player, Bruins coach back in the day, division championship in 2004, number 1 seed, blew a 3-1 lead in the first round series against Montreal, but that's neither here nor there. That was a long time ago. And to be honest, Mike Sullivan was in kind of a shit situation back in the day with O'Connell as GM. They kind of ran him into the ground after the lockout, and Mike Sullivan was just kind of the sacrificial lamb. So he was dealing with a bad GM, a team that needed a reboost, a rebuild, retool, whatever you wanted to call it back then, with a new GM, a new captain, all these new players. And Mike Sullivan wasn't around for it. He becomes a sacrificial lamb. He's canned. Claude Julien comes in, becomes the all-time winningest coach in Bruins history, leads him to the Stanley Cup in 2011. But the first part of that, a GM that's not working out, kind of a not great salary cap situation, which is where they were in 2006. Not terrible, but not great. They just traded their captain. That sounds familiar. In fact, all of it sounds familiar. A team that won the division 2 years ago and then didn't make the playoffs, just like Mike Sullivan did in 2004 and he's fired in 2006 after a bad season. Or how about, having an unsuccessful GM? That sounds pretty familiar right now. GM that's on the hot seat. O'Connell gets thrown to the Wolves at the same time as Mike Sullivan. Don Sweeney's still here, so that's a bit of a difference. Traded the captain. Joe Thornton traded in 2005, November of 2005. Brad Marchand traded at the trade deadline this year. Both in their coaches last season. Both need a retool, a rebuild with some core players. 2006, you still had you had very young, Bergeron and Krejci and Tim Thomas just kind of breaking into the league. You needed to build up everything else. This team maybe a little bit better, right? Charlie McAvoy in his prime, David Pastrnak in his prime, Morgan Geekie, hopefully not just a Pastrnak merchant and can maybe be a 2025 goal scorer. More ready to believe that than he is a 30 goal scorer. There are a ton of similarities from Mike Sullivan getting canned last time with the Bruins to the situation he walks into right now. And I mentioned those guys in their prime. Did you know that one of them is his son-in-law? Is that weird? Is that kind of a red flag? The guy who could be the captain of this team, Charlie McAvoy, is his son-in-law. No power struggle there. Nothing weird. No internal conflicts there. I mean, it's not as close as Mike Keenan and Mark Messier were, of course. I mean, they were like Randy and Mr. Leahy and the Trailer Park Boys, but maybe it's not quite that close. But I like Mike Sullivan. I wouldn't say it's the most gung-ho pick for new head coach of the Bruins, but then again, who is? David Carl might have got some people fired up. Joel Quenneville, I think, would be a great pick. But obviously, there's all kinds of skeletons in the closet there in terms of how people perceive Joel Quenneville in this league. That might not be the way to go. If you're the Bruins, personally, I don't care. I'd rather take Joel Quenneville as the second all-time winningest coach in history and 3 Stanley Cup championships. But hey, Mike Sullivan's got 2. He's a local guy. He knows Charlie McAvoy pretty well. And I think he can work with this team that's got a good core and needs some role players on the side. He's worked really well with role players. I mean, he turned Jake Gensel from a role player to a star. Brian Rust as a role player was a huge part of those Penguins teams. Phil Kessel was a big contributor to those Penguins teams as a guy who was at role player time in his career. I think Mike Sullivan can really do well with this Bruins team. On the flip side, because it is an easy sell for Don Sweeney to come in, guy, Massachusetts ties, former Bruin, 2 Stanley Cups, very easy sell for Don Sweeney to the fan base. But let's look at it from the other side. Does Mike Sullivan want to come here? Don Sweeney seems to be very convinced that who would want to turn down the Boston Bruins? We've got 100 years of history here. Who wouldn't want to turn that down? You know that no matter what you do, the GM is going to outlive you, and that he's going to have to say in who gets called up and who gets sent down. And at that point, you're wondering if Don Sweeney has the call on who's sitting up in the 9th floor as a healthy scratch. He's not going to have great communication with the coach. He hasn't had that for the last 2 coaches. And some role player might bitch about how you talk to them, and you could get canned. So I don't know if this is where Mike Sullivan wants to be. I really don't. Because there's some decent jobs out there. Chicago is not the most sexy, but you're going to have, 4 or 5 top 5 picks on that roster next year, including a supposedly generational one in Connor Bedard. Okay, so that's one team. Anaheim, good young core, and I do mean very young, but they showed some things at the end of last year. Cutter Gauthier really came on strong. It's a great place to live. They've got plenty of cap space to spend in this free agency period. It's an easy place to kind of attract guys to come and play with the sunny California. But that's a pretty sexy job right now. The other one's the New York Rangers. And the Rangers really want Mike Sullivan. Chris Drury, their GM, has said it for years that they would love to have Mike Sullivan if he was available. Now he's available. It comes obviously with the New York pressure, but not your hometown pressure. Not the pressure of being, coaching the team that you grew up rooting for, that you played for and coached for already in the Bruins. And a team in the Rangers that is probably more ready to win now than the Bruins are. They didn't miss out on the playoffs by all that much, even though it was a really tumultuous year. They still have good core pieces locked up. They've got a ready-made goalie, which he has not had in Pittsburgh in pretty much his whole time, his whole 10 years there. He didn't have one. And there's questions whether he would have one in Boston, even though Jeremy Swayman's locked up long-term. Shesterkin is that. You can debate how important a top-end NHL goalie is for a team at this point in 2025. But Mike Sullivan really values that position, and now he's got a really good one in Igor Shesterkin. You've got a Norris caliber and Norris winner at defense, and Adam Fox locked up. Was it his best year? No, it was not. Artemi Panarin, was it his best year? No, it was not. These guys are locked up, and they're ready to go. And I think they're still in probably a better win mode for 25-26 than the Bruins are. And the GM really wants him. And it's not going to be, Chris Drury making the decisions on who gets called up and who gets sent down and who's on your game day roster. Not your roster, but your game day roster. That should be the coach. And that's not going to be the case in Boston. And so Don Sweeney, who says, who would want to turn us down? 100 years of tradition. I mean, screw the fact that the Rangers and the Blackhawks are open. They only have 99 years of tradition. They're also original 6 teams. They're also in great hockey towns and great hockey markets. And they also have young core guys locked up. Right? In Chicago, it's obviously a different deal. They're very young. And there's a whole lot of mess on that roster. I don't know how much Mike Sullivan necessarily wants to start over in a place like Chicago, but if you're looking at the Bruins and the Rangers, two teams in pretty similar situations in terms of what their core is at, how far away they are from winning. New York's a little bit closer. If I'm Mike Sullivan, it's tough to turn down the Rangers. And they're gonna dish out some big money for Mike Sullivan. I don't know that the Bruins are. I doubt that the Bruins are. And I don't think the Bruins are going to have as much bait on the hook as the Rangers will. And shame on them if they don't, because you might not love Mike Sullivan as the sexy pick for your head coach, but what are the other options for NHL guys? Gerard Gallant, Peter Laviolette, Massachusetts guy, just got canned by the Rangers. Or how about another former Rangers coach that just got canned by the Flyers, who's also a Massachusetts guy? John Tortorella? You think that relationship's going to work? John Tortorella and Don Sweeney? I doubt it. I sincerely doubt it. I think Mike Sullivan is the obvious answer. And I just, at this point, I think the Rangers are going to put up a sexier offer than the Bruins will. And I think that sucks, because then what are you left with? If you're going balls on the table and getting Joel Quenneville, I'm in. That's a whole nother ball game. I'm in on that. But the Bruins don't have the balls to do that. The Bruins might not even have the balls to take the alley-oop and slam dunk the Mike Sullivan pick. So I'm being pessimistic here. I'm being very cynical. I saw that opening, and I had the split second of like, bam, there we go. We talked about it towards the end of the season. This looked like this time was running out in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh really needs to go into a different direction just entirely as an organization. Maybe that's the guy. I was talking about it during the Four Nations. Maybe Mike Sullivan is a guy you can attract to come here. And I had that same thought, for a couple of seconds. And then I remembered that Don Sweeney's the GM. And so that probably won't happen. Let me know who you want as the Bruins head coach, and if Mike Sullivan is the guy. Let me know in the comments section below. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Only about 10% of you are watching, are actually subscribed. So subscribe to the channel. We're bringing you nothing but Boston sports content 5 days a week. Check out the other videos on the channel and find us here live on YouTube every day, high noon Eastern time, and then wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Cam Stewart. Zach Burke keeps us on the air every day.